Hello, hello, and welcome to this latest edit of the Dorothy Edit, the latest edition of the Dorothy Edit, where I'm talking to another fabulous author about their book. Something a little bit different this time. We've got a non-fiction book, which I'm very excited for you to hear about. So I want to say hello, first of all, to Paula. Hello.
Hello.
And so, Paula, can you tell us the name of your book and a little bit about it, please?
Absolutely. So, my book is called When We Ruled: The Rise and Fall of 12 African Queens and Warriors. And it's kind of what it says on the tin. It's an exploration of African rulers from the ancient kingdom of Dahomey in present day Benin to ancient kingdoms of Rwanda, Madagascar, all of these African societies who were led by women and genderqueer rulers. And I think it's so interesting that you said nonfiction, because I think I've also tried to make it a narrative kind of history, for all of the fiction lovers out there, but also to try and reimagine the lives of not only the elites that I study in this book, but also their subjects, the people that they ruled over, the people that essentially made them what they were.
Absolutely, and absolutely, the best non-fiction books have a real narrative, a really good sort of like almost fiction-esque narrative, but a way of storytelling that engages you and draws you in, which is what this book is all about. It's sort of like finding a way to tell a non-fiction story in a very narrative, imaginative way, I think, using the best language. So what was the inspiration for this book? Why did you decide to write this?
Well, I'm a historian, and my area of focus is Black British history. But I think that when it comes to Black people in Britain, histories of the Caribbean, Africa, and Britain are so interlinked, as we know, in terms of migration, histories of colonization, etc. So I think to be able to really engage with Black British histories, I personally think it's a necessity to go backwards, to return to ancestral legacies, which shaped us before we arrived on these British Isles.
Who is your favourite person to write about? I'm not going to try and separate you from all your wonderful people you've talked about, but which was the one that you had the most joy, I suppose, writing about?
I think the most joy came with writing Nana Santwa's chapter, and she was a late 19th century, very early 20th century queen mother, of a village in present day Ghana, but then the Asante region. And I think because not only was she a warrior, particularly rising up against the British occupiers who were trying to secure the sacred golden stool, but also she was a historian and a genealogist in her own right. And when researching the book, her stories came to me like I really tried to focus on the experiences of contemporary Africans and how they understand these legacies. This was written with the insights of local storytellers, historians, but also everyday Africans who have encountered these legacies across their lives. And one interviewee described how her grandmother, also, of course, Nana, um, would, whenever the lights and electricity went out in their village, would gather all of the children and regale them with their own histories. And Nania Santwell was often among those. And I tried to present this particular chapter in that kind of form as well, just paying homage to all of the African women who preserve and guide us towards our histories and where we've come from. So I think that's the one that really affected me affected me the most, even though I'm not even Ghanaian, you know. So,
Well, I am of Ghanaian heritage, so you know what you're saying touches me there. Absolutely. What was the best thing about writing this book?
I think the best thing about writing the book was, of course, the research trip that I did. So I traveled for about 2 months going through all of the countries in the book apart from Ethiopia, um, given like the current situation there following the Tigrayan genocide. Um, and I got to meet so many, like I said, just like local storytellers, as well as heritage site guides, people who were working in and around where I was staying, or people who had appointed themselves as my escorts while out there. And there were so many things that happened and not necessarily fell into my lap, but just they felt so like within touching distance. It like I was encountering people who were royalty, who were just like, you know, or descended from royalty, but were like hotel managers of where I was staying and were able to talk to me about their personal legacies. I would speak to a guide who would hook me up, and then, you know, I'd suddenly be in a meeting with someone so powerful that, and who's within those countries. So, for example, within Benin, there was questions around whether Tassi Hangbe, who is the focus of one of the chapters and was a ruler of Dahomey and credited with creating the all-woman regiment, the Ogodje, who we know from the Woman King and potentially from Black Panther. There were question marks as to whether her bloodline had even survived. And then I was, you know, introduced to someone that suggested that it really, yeah, of course it did. And so many things happened that it felt after a while like this isn't just luck. It feels guided. It feels ancestrally guided, especially because I was learning and engaging with so many different African indigenous divinities and regularly speaking about ancestors. And yeah, so it just felt like I think this is it. I'm being led, and as someone who isn't religious, who's always like envied faith, that um, that really gave me a lot of faith in the ability of ancestral forces, ancestors to prod and prompt you towards histories that we've, you know, been um, convinced or taught to turn away from. And yeah, it was quite incredible, and I'll never forget it.
What do you want readers to take from your book?
I want readers to feel empowered to question and challenge and trouble colonial retellings of our histories, colonial accounts, because I think in a lot of different ways I demonstrate across the book the way that Western history work can be seen as speculative in some ways. I introduce readers to an example of the self-awareness that colonial officials had when presenting British accounts to their audiences. There was an idea of what would be accountable, an accountable history, um, and what wouldn't be. And accountable histories did not include enslaved Africans escaping, for example. When that happened, they and certainly wanted to ensure that they could control that narrative. And when so much of what we know about Africa has been fed through colonial sources, I don't understand how we can see them as much more credible historical sources than the indigenous focuses, the indigenous people that they're meant to be about. Um, so I want and I hope that people will engage the way that I've also critiqued these sources, the fact that some of these colonial sources come from people who were administrators, colonial administrators of occupied kingdoms and societies. Why are they more credible to us? Yeah, I think that's my main hope.
Okay, can you give us a quick reading from your book, please?
Sure thing. I will. Ooh, not me tipping my little screen over. I've just got to charge it. Because I have 4% at the same time. So I was just like, I can cleverly charge this at the same time, but it's fine. We've got 4%. We'll go. I'll read a little excerpt from the introduction. Softness and vulnerability aren't extended to us, an interviewee told me. It's a sentiment that this Black woman and many others are intimately acquainted with. Instead, the logic of anti-Blackness frames us as figures who must endure, suffer, and flirt with pain. But my interviewee wasn't talking about Black women collectively. She wasn't referring to African women in general. Instead, this young woman from Benin was describing the lot of her fellow countrywomen. As we broke bread together in the country's largest city, Cotonou, she had run through some of the stereotypes. Togolese women are good cooks and know how to please a man. The Congolese are known for their beauty. The Beninese, however, are strong. They're fighters. Within her country, this gets passed out even further. The women from the north of this West African nation are better wives because they know the place of men. Their sisters down south, however, are framed as difficult women. They have too much pride. They do not submit easily. Why? Because these women, especially from around Abome, are still today measured against the history of the land and the women who once stalked it. Abome, the capital of the historic royal kingdom of Dahomey, was once defended by an all-women regiment known as the Agujie. And this squad of fighters, according to local historians, was created by the kingdom's only woman ruler, Tassi Hangbe. Hangbe is one of many African queens and warriors whose history is considered untold, even though the weight of her legacy is borne by some of her people today. Others, especially but not limited to scholars and historians outside Benin, question whether she even existed. Despite the adamance of many Abome historians and storytellers who assert that she was real and that she ruled, colonial accounts and internal disputes have ushered in an element of enduring doubt. History is written by the victors, a white man said. It continues to be taught by the victors. From formative school years through university, history has always been presented as concrete, whole, lacking any veneer. We learnt about the Irish potato famine, albeit with British colonialism pushed to the margins. The Cold War, US equals good, Soviet Union equals very bad. And US civil rights, Martin Luther King Jr., the paragon of respectable, non-violent protest, unlike the hard-talking, implicitly villainous Malcolm X. As if they were all one inarguable past reality. When it comes to race, the determinedly outward-facing focus of the UK national curriculum wouldn't become clear and obvious until I was beyond its grasp. The gentle romance of history as gathered fragments offering glimpses of a bygone society gave way to a more steely process, one guided by curation and self-awareness. Nowhere was this clearer than when I encountered Stephanie E. Smallwood's work on the 18th century Cape Coast vessel incident during my master's degree. The historian recounted how 13 men and 4 boys, all African, captured and intended for a lifetime of enslavement, escaped when the British ship ran aground off the coast of present-day Ghana on 6th of September 1721. In correspondence between the English Royal African Company and its employees, officials noted that the 17 men and boys were unchained before they escaped, Otherwise, the enslaved Africans rising up against 7 white men would make for a very unaccountable history. This was a revealing admission that the colonial state wished to present a history that would make sense to its intended readership, that there were certain histories, counter histories, that would derail their narrative. Over time, I've learned that history is also written by the hungry, those keenly aware of the lack, the voids, those in search of the counter histories. After all, world ending and world building events on the African continent weren't just imparted with ink onto paper. Societal shifts announced themselves in migrating communities and expanding circles of kin. Experiences of loss and gain, wealth and frugality, becoming the conqueror and the subjugated, these wrote themselves into familial bloodlines. Supple black flesh bore horrors we can never wholly conceptualize. The land, its people, and their descendants carry the scores of time. How can such lack emerge when the consequences have been so abundant? So that's just like a little bit.
Doubt about you.
You can find me on most platforms, Paula Akpan, and my website, paulaakpan.com. Yeah, that's really where I'll be.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Paula. It's been lovely talking to you, and hopefully I'll get to talk to you again soon.
Fingers crossed. Thank you so much for having me, Dorothy.
Okay, thanks. Doubt about you.